students, Mr. Young here. We have been working sort of on a U.S. government kind of thing for the last couple weeks here, talking about the Constitution and how it was made, compromises, things like that. Now that we're into Chapter 9, we're switching back to history mode, taking a step back. Alright, we have this new government formed. How's this going to pan out? That's what we're talking about today. So, we remember the Articles of Confederation were pretty bad. There were a lot of problems, and they had a constitutional convention get together to try to revise the Articles, and they ended up starting from scratch and building what would become the U.S. Constitution. What happens next? Let's find out. So, there were actually presidents before George Washington. Did you know that? But they weren't in an executive branch. They were just presidents of the Congress. The first actual executive president, the head of the executive branch, as most of us know when you think of the first president, is George Washington. If I ever use the term POTUS, it is President of the United States. If you ever see FLOTUS, that's First Lady of the United States. SCOTUS, Supreme Court of the United States. There's all kinds of Otuses of the United States. Little extra nugget for you. But moving on, Washington is inaugurated as the President of the United States, the first President of the United States, on April 30th, 1789. His Vice President is John Adams. He won the election unanimously, so there's not really a whole lot of talk in your textbook, or even a simple Google search about the election. But Washington knew that as the very first President of the United States, he would set what are called precedents. And that means he knew that the following presidents would kind of use him as an example for what to do. For example, George Washington ran for re-election once, so he was the president for 2 terms, 8 years. As a result, a lot of following presidents said, that sounds good, 2 terms sounds like enough. That kind of thing. In his first years, Washington worked closely with Congress to get this new government started. There was still a lot of work to do. Among the work done, Washington created the first cabinet in the summer of 1789. Take a look below at who they were. They basically served as department heads and advisors to the executive branch of the government. For example, John Adams was the vice president. That's actually because he won second place. Back then, you didn't run as a president or a vice president. It was just whoever won was the president, and whoever came in second place was the vice president. Made for some awkward history later. Thomas Jefferson's the Secretary of State, sort of the head diplomat. Alexander Hamilton becomes Secretary of the Treasury. Edmund Randolph becomes the Attorney General, sort of the highest lawyer in the land. Henry Knox becomes the Secretary of War. Now, the new Congress, or the first Congress, also created the new judicial branch. Remember, the Constitution established a judicial branch. Now we need to build it. There are debates on exactly how this should go. Should the existing states' courts that already exist be replaced with a new uniform system so everything's the same? Should they keep their state court systems? They figured it all out and made a new system with what's called the Judiciary Act of 1789. They basically let the states keep their court systems that already existed, but also created a federal court system with the power to overturn state decisions. Washington nominated John Jay as the first Chief Justice, and hey, the Senate approved. Here's a picture of John Jay looking supreme on the Supreme Court. Now remember, those last few states refused to ratify the Constitution unless it had a Bill of Rights. So they promised to add a Bill of Rights, so that's something they need to do right away. James Madison introduced 12 amendments to the Constitution, and they were all passed by the Congress. But we only ended up with 10. The Bill of Rights is the first 10 amendments to the Constitution because the states had to ratify amendments, and they needed to be unanimous. Scratch that. It didn't need to be unanimous. But long story short, only 10 of the 12 were ratified by the states. And you can check them here. this awesome site. It's things here like freedom of religious and free speech. We've got the ever controversial Second Amendment with guns, no quartering, things like that. Remember, colonists hate when you quarter troops in their houses, so there's an amendment for that. Things like you're not allowed to give cruel and unusual punishments. It's your Bill of Rights. We're not going to go too much into it this year. So that's how we ended up with the Bill of Rights. The first 10 amendments to the Constitution. It's like, that was quick. We just made the Constitution. Here's 10 new amendments. All right, George Washington was a foreign policy and military wonk. I actually linked that definition here. Basically, if you're a wonk at something, it means you're kind of, it's your specialty. It's something you know a lot about. So he was good at foreign policy and the military. It makes sense. He was the commander of the Continental Army. He left economic policies to his Secretary of Treasury, Alexander Hamilton. Hamilton's first order of business was handling the problem of the national debt. See, the states, which were colonies, when they had borrowed all this money, they had borrowed a lot of money to fight the Revolution, and all that debt was now a problem he wanted to solve. So the problem is the leaders knew that if they were going to take out more loans, essentially they had to pay off the loans that they already made or already taken in order to prove that they were capable of taking loans and paying them back. So Hamilton needed a plan to get rid of this debt, to prove to these foreign lenders that we were capable of handling the responsibility of more debt. So he had this idea to have the federal government pay off all the debts of the states. Some states liked this, particularly the ones that had a lot of debt. Other states did not like this. Like southern states really didn't like this idea because some of them had actually already paid off their debt, so they thought it was unfair that they would be taxed by the federal government and then their taxes would be used to pay off other people's loans, other states' loans. For this reason, the South opposed this plan, and Hamilton had to basically make a compromise. He essentially told the southern states that if they approved of this plan for the federal government to pay off the state debts, they would put the national capital in the South. And that's what they did. The capital of our great nation, Washington, D.C., named after George Washington, is located just in the South right there. You can kind of see it here. Slap dab right between Virginia and Maryland. That's how the capital ended up there. At the time, it was very centrally located within the colonies. Hamilton had other policies. He wanted to create a national bank. The purpose of this bank was to make payments for the government to pay off its debt, hold the government's money, and even issue national currency. At the time, all the states were using different money, so that really made things a little more complex. You remember that the Continental Congress tried this once with the Continentals, and in my lesson we wrote about the Yundabucks and how useless they were, if they were real. James Madison and Thomas Jefferson actually opposed the idea of a national bank. They said it would help the rich, and it was not a power stated in the Constitution. Hamilton argued that it was implied in the Constitution when it gave the power for the federal government to collect taxes, borrow money, and coin money. Washington actually ended up agreeing with Hamilton, and that's why we had a national bank form. And that's probably a good reason to keep Hamilton here on the $10 bill, because he actually made the first bank, which made the first money. Hamilton also wanted tariffs on foreign goods. The South didn't like this idea as they did not have a lot of industry, so they shipped in a lot of goods, and that would mean that their goods would now cost more. They didn't like that. As a result, you ended up having compromises, and you ended up having tariffs to pay federal taxes, but they were all pretty light. They were pretty inexpensive, not doing a whole lot to pay off that debt. He also wanted to start national taxes on items like whiskey. Not everyone liked taxes, so that little nugget, whiskey tax in particular, is going to cause us trouble in the very near future. That's a story for another day. Hamilton was doing some big things to expand the power of this new government. Not everyone was happy about this. Lines were being drawn in the sand, so to speak. that would end up becoming the first two political parties, with Hamilton on this side and guys like Madison and Thomas Jefferson on the other side. And we're going to talk about these political parties, originally called factions, coming up here in the chapter. For today, you're going to have a simple quiz today. I've got a lot of grading to do. I need to get it under control. So simple quiz today. Maybe we'll have a writing assignment next time. But we'll see. That's your lesson for the day. As always, if you have any questions, feel free to contact me. Otherwise, I think you'll be all right. Have a good one.